keep it. Yeah, keep it off. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صدري ويسر Brothers and sisters, before we begin, if we can, there's plenty of space over here. I know that it's very packed in the back over there. If people can come closer to the front, don't feel shy. Those brothers in the room, if you don't need to be there, inshallah, if you could come over here, it would be very nice of you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المذلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم يا عطشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم والعمنا من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال سيدنا ومولانا صاحب الزمان أجل الله تعالى فرجا فلئن أخرتني الدهور وآقني النصر كالمقدور ولم أكن لمن حاربك محاربا ولمن نسب لك العداوة مناسبا فلأندبنك صباحا ومساء ولأبكين لك بدل دموع الدماء وصل اللهم على محمد وآل محمد. My brothers and sisters, before I begin with our discussion for tonight, I thought that it might be prudent to mention a couple of points. Firstly, that this particular night, as we all know, is the night of Ashura. This is the night of tragedy. This is the night of grief. This is the night when we shed tears for our master, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and his family members and his companions and his women. And we live in a society in this part of the world that doesn't necessarily embrace weeping or doesn't necessarily embrace crying. It's not something very manly, so to say. Keep that to the side. This is for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Marginalize this culture that we live in, at least for one night, and soften your hearts firstly by seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you fail to shed a tear for Imam al-Hussein, if you fail to let out a scream for Imam al-Hussein, if you fail to sigh over the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, it's not, necessarily the fault of the one reciting the poetry, or it's not the fault of the one reciting the Majlis, but it's the fault of someone who hasn't had their heart purified and attached with the love of Imam al-Hussein. We need to be amongst those who do anything that we can to weep, to cry, to scream out when hearing the tragedies of Imam al-Hussein. Someone says, I have this pure heart, and I'm sure that you do, but I'm still unable to do that. We go and we see the narration states from the Imam alayhi salam, من بكى أو أبكى أو تباكى فله الجنة. That the one who cries, the one who makes others cry, and the one who cannot cry himself, and the one who does not make others cry, but the one who he himself tries to cry. Meaning that you try to invoke this emotion from your heart, from your soul, to weep for Imam al-Hussein. If you cannot cry during the masa'ib, look down, don't look at me. What benefit is it going to be to look at me? Go and scream, let out a sigh. Do anything to try to invoke the emotion and weep for Imam al-Hussein. And if you cannot, then make an attempt to do so. The hadith, it says, in kunta baki'an ala shay, فَأَبْكِ عَلَى الْحُسَيْنِ alayhi salam, that if you're going to cry over something, then cry over Hussein. This is number one. Do your best to do whatever you can to invoke this emotion, to have your heart break over the tragedy of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam on this night, and of course tomorrow, inshallah. This is step number one, or point number one that I want to mention before my discussion. And number two, that we need to do whatever that we can to register ourselves amongst the servants of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein. I've said this in a previous night. Do whatever you can. Man, woman, elderly, a child, everyone do something in the name of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, whatever it has to be. If you have an opportunity to go and give water in the name of Imam al-Hussein right here in the masjid, go and do that. If you can go and help by sweeping the floors outside, then go and do that. If you can recite poetry for Imam al-Hussein, recite the poetry. If you can recite Ma'tam for Imam al-Hussein, recite Ma'tam. If you can't do any of this, and only thing you can do is in the middle of the Majlis or in the middle of the Masab, call out Ya Hussein, then call out Ya Hussein. Whatever you do, whatever you can do to make Imam al-Hussein say that this man, this woman, this child, this adult is my follower, is my servant, do it. And amongst the most simple things, and it's unfortunate that that the community has to come over here and ask you, in the name of Imam al-Hussein to give money. This is not befitting of the lovers of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. No one needs to come to you and ask you to donate money to the center in the name of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You should be doing it willingly. My brothers and sisters, we're better than this. In the name of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, register yourself amongst his servants so that on that day when we need Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he is there ready to intercede for us. Please recite one salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And another one on this night to console the heart of Rabab. For tonight's discussion, we want to take a look at one of the most important pieces of literature that we have in terms of the history of Karbala. And this piece of literature is what is known as Ziyarat al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. When we go ahead and try to examine the different sources of the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, we see that we have the books written by historians in terms of what is known as the Maqatil literature. Amongst these sources that we have are letters written, for instance, from Imam al-Hussein to Muslim bin Aqil, from Muslim bin Aqil to Imam al-Hussein, from Imam al-Hussein to his other messengers, and so on and so forth, that we have these recollections within our books of history. Amongst the sources of literature that we have, for instance, are the poetry that we recite. These poems that have been recited during the times of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, in which the Imams encouraged certain poets to recite the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein, they are also a means for us to understand and to comprehend what took place on the day of Ashura. But furthermore, in regards to perhaps the most important aspect of literature that we have in regards to the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein, we have certain salutations, or what are known as ziyarat. And arguably the most important of the ziyarat in regards to Imam al-Hussein that demonstrate toward us what took place on the day of Ashura and what took place after that is the salutation known as Ziyarat al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. Thus the first question that we need to pose for tonight's discussion is what exactly Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. What is Nahiya al-Muqaddasa? What does it mean? And why is this ziyarah known as Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa? We come forth and we see that within the narrations of the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt, alayhim as-salatu was-salam, we come forth and we see that a large body of ahadith, for example, if you open up Usul al-Kafi, it mentions the importance of never mentioning the name of our 12th Imam. You see, during the time of the Ghaybat al-Sughra, we come forth and we see that the Shia of Ahl al-Bayt was in the state of taqiyya. They had to secretly transmit the teachings of Ahl al-Bayt to one another. Thus we come and we see a large body of ahadith from Imam al-Sadiq, from Imam Ali al-Rada, from Imam al-Hadi, Imam al-Askari, that mention that when our son, the last from the Imams, come, make sure that you never mention his name in public. Let us go ahead and take a look at some of these ahadith. We have one hadith narrated from Safwan. Safwan hears on the authority of Imam al-Sadiq, alayhi salatu was-salam. The Imam, he states, those who believe in the Imams and reject the Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraja, it is as if that they've believed in all of the prophets and rejected Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Safwan, he asks Imam al-Sadiq, he says, Yabna Rasulillah, and who is the Mahdi? At this moment, the Imam alayhi salam says, he is the fifth from the line of the seventh. He is the fifth Imam from the progeny of the seventh Imam, meaning he's the fifth grandson of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam. And then the Imam continues, and he will be amongst those who are hidden from his community, and no one should state his name. No one should state his name. This is hadith number 1. Another hadith also comes from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, in which he states, Sahib hadha al-amr, rajulun la yusammihi bi-ismihi illa kafir. The Imam, he says that the individual who will come at the end of times and the last Imam from our progeny, he is a man who will come and no one will state his name publicly except for a disbeliever. We go and we see the very strong language of the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt, alayhim afdalu salatu wassalam, in regards toward this particular point. And many of the ulama, after the Ghaybat al-Sughra, they came to discuss this particular idea. They state that should we never mention the name al-Mahdi ever, or was it only relative toward that particular point in time, in regards to safeguard the Shia? For if they were amongst those who said the name publicly, perhaps they would be imprisoned, perhaps they would be abused, tortured, so on and so forth. And of course, the majority of the ulama of the Ahl al-Bayt, they take this opinion, that during the Ghaybat al-Sughra and the earlier period of the Ghaybat al-Kubra, it was not allowed for anyone to mention the name Mahdi or Muhammad al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. Thus we go toward the hadith. And if they wanted to narrate something from their master, the Imam, what would they state? According to some narrations, they would state that the Sayyid told us. They would state that the title of the Imam is the Sayyid, and those exclusive Shia companions, they would realize and recognize that the term Sayyid means Imam al-Zaman. Number 1. Number 2, another term that would be attributed toward the Imam is that they would state that we heard or we have received a letter from as-Sahib. Of course, we call him Sahib az-Zaman. And by this particular title, those close companions again would realize and understand that the knowledge that is being transmitted toward them is from Imam alayhi salam. There were other titles, and arguably the most common title that was attributed to anything that came from Imam al-Zaman alayhi salatu wassalam is the fact that they would come forth and state that we heard or we saw or we received a letter from Nahiyatul Muqaddasa, from the holy precinct, in order to honor and to dignify the Imam alayhi salam. Thus, whenever you open up the books of ahadith And it says that this particular narration comes from Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. It means that it is coming from our master, Imam al-Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. Thus we come to pose this question. Then what exactly does it mean when we state Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa? Of course, this is in reference toward a ziyarah transmitted by the Imam alayhi salam. And when we go toward the books of dua, the books of ziyarat, the books of ahadith, we come forth and we see that ziyarat al-nahiyya al-muqaddasa is of two types. The first ziyarat al-nahiyya al-muqaddasa is a ziyarah narrated by Imam al-Zaman, in which he sends his salutations upon each and every one of the companions of Imam al-Hussein. We go ahead and we see that the hadith it says, in which the Imam he narrates toward his companions, toward his Shia, إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَزُورْ فَقِفْ عِنْدَ رِجْلَيْ إِمَامِ الْحُسَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ وَهُوَ قَبْرُ عَلِيِّ بْنِ الْحُسَيْنِ الْأَكْبَرِ وَإِسْتَقْبَلْ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ وَقُلْ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. The Imam he says, O followers of mine, if you want to go and perform the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, then go toward Karbala, go toward the dari of Imam al-Hussein, stand by the legs of Imam al-Hussein, which is the grave site of Ali al-Akbar, face the Qibla and recite this ziyarah. And then he begins to narrate that particular ziyarah. He begins by sending his salutations upon Imam al-Hussein. He sends his salutations upon Ali al-Akbar. He sends his salutations upon the 6-month-old infant. He sends his salutations on Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. And then he begins to narrate one by one the companions of Imam al-Hussein by their name, by their title, and who killed them on the day of Ashura. Thus we see that this particular ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa of Imam al-Zaman is a tool for those of us who want to study and research exactly what happened on the day of Ashura. For we go ahead and we have a list of all of the names, a list of what which tribes that they came from, and even the individuals who killed those particular people. This is the first version of ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. But if we open up the books of ziyarat and the books of ahadith, we come forth and we see that there is another ziyarah also known as ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. And this is the common one that we often listen to, that we recite for instance, and so on and so forth. This particular ziyarah of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salatu wassalam comes forth, and it begins by sending salutations upon the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it continues by sending salutations upon Imam al-Hussein, then goes into the specific details of what took place on the day of Ashura, and is arguably one of the most important pieces of literature that we have in regards to the tragedy of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, in regards to the sources and in regards to the concepts and detail of what took place on the day of Ashura. Thus, when we want to come and study and reflect and try to take an introduction in regards to ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, I want to discuss this particular salutation in a couple of phases, 2 or 3, depending on our time. The first one is exactly what is the importance of ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. And secondly, how do we respond to certain doubts that people present in regards toward this ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. And thirdly, if we have time, what are some of those important lines that Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam says to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in the midst of this particular ziyarah? In order to do that, please let us recite one salawat. We come and we see that, as we mentioned before, that the ziyarat or the words of the Ahlul Bayt in general are arguably the most important and greatest means in terms of determining what happened on the day of Ashura. We have a large body of literature from historians during the periods of the Umayyad or during the period of the Abbasid, which narrated what happened on the day of Ashura. But oftentimes, what do we come and we see? That these individuals are the enemies of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And they're historians. They are looking at the events of what happened from an unbiased perspective and narrating the details of what took place on that day from the sources that they collected. But when the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, they speak about what happened on the day of Ashura, and they present toward us details and ahadith and narrations and salutations about what happened on the day of Ashura, they allow us to gain a higher level of ma'rifah in regards to exactly what happened on that day. So the first reason why Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is so important is because that this is the word of the Imam. These are the words of Imam Sahib al-Zaman. And the words of the Imam are the words of the infallible. They are perfect words. And the words of Imam Sahib al-Zaman, they present toward us a far deeper understanding of what happened on that day, contrary toward the historical sources, which are generally accepted as reliable. This is number one. Number two, we come and we see that Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is of exclusive importance because it clears up certain contradictions that historians come forth and they state about what happened on the day of Ashura. Let me present toward you an example. If you open up the books of literature in regards to what happened on the day of Ashura, one of the most common questions posed is who killed Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. We go ahead and we see that one source says that the killer of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was a man by the name of Sinan ibn Anas. Another historian comes forth and states that the individual who killed Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is the man by the name of Hasin ibn Namir, the one who killed Habib ibn Madahir. And by other recognitions, by other collections of history, the one who kills Ali al-Akbar. A third group of historians, they come forth and they state that the one who has killed Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is a man by the name of Khuli or Khwalli, that famous individual who was in charge of the heads of the family of Abu Abdullah. And finally, there's a fourth group of historians who come forth and they state, and of course this is the most common opinion amongst us, that the killer of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is a man by the name of Shimr bin Dhil Jawshan. We go and we see that we have all of these different viewpoints in regards to history. If someone is desiring to study this particular event in detail, then this is arguably one of the most important questions that they desire to pose. And we come forth and we see that in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, Imam Sahib al-Zaman, he narrates toward us a response toward this question. He states, وَالشِّمْرُ جَالِسٌ عَلَى صَدْرِكَ وَمُولِغٌ سَيْفَهُ عَلَى نَحْرِكَ قَابِضٌ عَلى شَيْبَتِكَ بِيَدِهِ ضَابِحٌ لَكَ بِمُحَنَّدِهِ. Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam says, "O Abu Abdullah, and I recall that moment when Shimr was sitting on your chest with his sword in his right hand, and he has taken your beard with his other hand, and he began to slaughter you, O Abu Abdullah." Thus we come forth and we see that Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is a means to reconcile contradictions which are founded in history. Thirdly, we come forth and we see that Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa provides us with knowledge that we would otherwise not have in the other books of history. Meaning that the historians, they come forth and they narrate what happened. But oftentimes when a historian is narrating a particular event, he's not going to be able to cover all of the aspects of history. Thus we come forth and we see that in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, Imam Sahib al-Zaman presented toward us details which are not founded in the books of history. Let me give you two examples. One of them, when the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam comes forth and he states these lines. And my brothers and sisters, these lines are lines of tragedy. For oftentimes when we come to remember the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein, we often reflect and we state that the blessed body of Sayyid al-Shuhada was trampled one time. When was that? That was on the night of the 11th of Muharram. But look at what Imam Sahib al-Zaman says. For the body of your master Abu Abdullah wasn't trampled only after he had passed away on the night of the 11th of Muharram, but the body of Imam Sahib al-Zaman was trampled even while he was alive. The Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, he states, تضب عن نسوتك وأولادك حتى نكثوك عن جوادك فحويت إلى الأرض جريحة تتأك الخيول بحوافرها وتألوك الطغاة ببوارتها. The Imam, he says that, O Aba Abdullah, you were defending your women and your children until all of a sudden that moment came when you fell down from your horse as you were wounded. At that moment, the horses of the enemy, they began to come and their hooves trampled on your blessed body. At that moment, the enemy, they surrounded you with their swords raised, ready to strike you, O Aba Abdullah. This is number one. A second line, oftentimes when you read about the history, about what happened and what transgressed after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, we come and we see that the only individual that we narrate that was tied by these iron rods and was dragged, and those rods were tied from his hands toward his neck, we only mention the tragedy and the musibah of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salatu wassalam. But we come forth and we see that in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, Imam al-Zaman doesn't only reference the fact that Imam al-Sajjad was tied by these iron rods and tied from his hands to his neck, but Imam al-Zaman also mentions that the women of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein were tied by these iron chains. The Imam alayhi salatu wassalam, he states in these lines of tragedy, وَصُبِّيَ أَحْلُكَ كَالْعَبِيدِ وَصُفِّدُوا فِي الْحَدِيدِ فَوْقَ أَقْتَابِ الْمُطِيعَاتِ تَلْفَهُ وُجُوهَهُمْ حَرُّ الْحَاجِرَاتِ يُسَاقُونَ فِي الْبَرَارِ وَالْفَلَوَاتِ أَيْدِيهِمْ مَغْلُولَةٌ إِلَى الْأَعْنَاقِ يُطَافُ بِهِمْ فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. He says, O Aba Abdullah, and your family was imprisoned like slaves. They were bound by iron chains as they were on the top of the camels, with their heat being exposed to the intensity of the sun. With their hands chained to their necks, they were paraded through the marketplaces. Thus we come forth and we see that the third reason for the importance of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is the fact that Imam al-Zaman provides us certain aspects of history which are otherwise not narrated in the books of literature. Fourthly, we come and we see that Imam al-Zaman, in the midst of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, presents toward us, the reader, certain aspects of the greatness of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein on the day of Ashura. When a historian is watching a scene, again, he can only encapsulate what he is seeing in regards to a limited amount of words. But when Imam al-Zaman, he explains what happens to Imam al-Hussein, and when he explains the character of Imam al-Hussein on that day of Ashura, we come and we see that he presents his language toward us in a way that truly demonstrates what Imam al-Hussein had to go through on that day, and what courage and what loyalty and his fada'il on that day as well. We come forth and we see one line that speaks about the courage of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in the words of Imam al-Zaman. He says, وَتَحَنْتَ جُنُودُ الْفُجَّارِ وَاقْتَحَمْتَ قِسْتَ الْغَبَارِ مُجَاهِدًا بِذِي الْفِقَارِ كَأَنَّكَ عَلِيٌّ الْمُخْتَارِ. He says, O Aba Abdullah, I saw you on that day as you were pulverizing the enemy soldiers. You were destroying them with the Dhul Fiqar in your right hand, and on that day you were resembling Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In regards to the courage of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura. Secondly, we come and we see another line, which also demonstrates toward us the greatness of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein on the day of Ashura in regards to the patience. And what patience did Abu Abdullah have to show on the day of Ashura? Allahu Akbar. When we narrate the tragedy of the 6-month-old infant, For those of you who have children, if you recall when you had a child who was of that age, can you imagine? When the smallest thing happens to your child, you begin to worry. Imagine the patience of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, and then imagine the patience of Zainab salamullah alayha. It is said, Imam al-Zaman states, قَدْ أَجَبَتْ مِنْ صَبْرِكَ مَلَائِكَةِ السَّمَاوَاتِ. It says, O Aba Abdullah, that from your patience, O Imam al-Hussein, that the angels in the heavens, they were confused at how a man could remain so patient. Do we know the least bit about the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? No, we don't. We don't know the least bit about what happened to Abu Abdullah. What happened to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is only in these words, and only in a couple of phrases or a couple of lines of poetry or a couple of lines of musibah. What Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam was really going through on that day of Ashura, none of us can understand. Only Abu Abdullah and perhaps only Sahib al-Zaman. Thus we come and we see, as we mentioned, that these are some important aspects of ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, and it is a very important and exclusive tool in regards to narrating what happened on the day of Ashura. The next phase of the discussion which we want to come forth and pose is how do we respond to some doubts which are presented in regards to ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. What are some of these doubts? Of course, the first doubt, which is always presented, as we mentioned last night and as we mentioned on previous nights, is that whenever someone wants to question the reliability of a source, what's the first thing that they state? That the chain of transmission is weak. That the sanad of this is weak. It's not a sahih narration. And when we come forth, and when we open up the books of ahadith, we come and we see that this particular ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is narrated in a book called Al-Mazar al-Kabir, by a scholar by the name of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Mash'adi, who compiles his book called Mazar al-Kabir, in which Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is mentioned. They come forth and they state, when we open up the book and when we go toward the pages which are recollected of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, we see that he doesn't present toward us a chain of transmission back toward Imam al-Zaman. Thus they state that the hadith or the ziyarah is what is known as mursal, and it cannot be applied. We respond by stating a couple of points. Number one, Sheikh al-Mash'adi, if you come forth and take a look at the introduction to his book, Mazar al-Kabir, he states that every single thing, every single ziyarah, and every single dua that I present within this book that I have narrated toward you, it comes toward me from a trustworthy line back toward the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. Thus we go and he says himself, and he's a trustworthy scholar, and we can take his word for it, that everything that he narrates comes from an authentic source. Secondly, we see that one of the greatest ulama in the last century or so, a scholar by the name of Sheikh Muhammad Hussein Kashif al-Ghita, who passed away in the 1950s in the holy city of Najaf, he would come forth and apply the teachings of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. He would narrate in his lectures and in his majalis from Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, and according to some of the ulama, that he would even derive fatawa from Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa. Thus, without a doubt, we can push aside this particular doubt that is presented in regards to Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa being a salutation which is weak in terms of its chain of transmission. This is the first doubt that people come forth and they bring about. The second doubt that some individuals they come forth and they bring in regards to Ziyarat al-Nahiyah is the fact that Ziyarat al-Nahiyah contradicts certain aspects of our aqeedah. How do we respond toward these particular points? And what are these contradictions in our aqeedah that are founded in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa? I'll present toward you one example. When we go toward studying imamah, when we're studying theology, aqeedah, we have a very important principle that we need to understand. This principle states that a ma'soom cannot be buried except by another ma'soom. The burial rituals, the funeral rituals of any of the ma'soomeen, they can only be performed by another one of the ma'soomeen. For instance, who is responsible for burying the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Amir al-Mu'mineen. Who is responsible for burying Lady Fatima alayhi salam? Amir al-Mu'mineen. Who is responsible for burying Amir al-Mu'mineen and performing all of the rituals? Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein. Who is responsible for burying Aba Abdullah? Or who is responsible for burying Imam al-Hasan? Imam al-Hussein. Who is responsible for burying Aba Abdullah? Imam al-Sajjad, which is why we stayed on the 13th of Muharram, that Imam Zainul Abidin, he returns back by means of miracle to come and perform the burial of his father, Aba Abdullah. We come forth and we see that in the books of Ahadith. We see that though Imam Ali ibn Musa Rada alayhi salatu wasalam is in Khurasan, by miracle Imam al-Jawad, who was a young boy at that time, he comes by miracle from Medina toward Khurasan, and he comes forth and he performs the rituals of the burial of his father, Imam Ali Rada. Thus, what is the question and where is the contradiction? We come and we see that in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, Imam al-Zaman, he states, As-salamu ala man dafnuhu ahl al-qura. Peace be upon the one who is buried by the people of that town. People come forth and they state that, look, Imam al-Zaman, or as you state, Imam al-Zaman states that the one who buried Aba Abdullah al-Hussein is who? The people in that city. But of course, we believe that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam in our Aqidah is the one responsible for burying Imam al-Hussein. How do we reconcile this particular problem? Please understand this point, which is very, very important. If I am sitting over here and I state that Muhammad has entered into the masjid, and another individual comes forth and he states that Ali has entered into the masjid, do these two statements contradict? No. If someone comes forth and states that Muhammad has entered into the masjid and Ali has never entered into the masjid, does these statements contradict with the first statement that Muhammad and Ali both entered into the masjid? Obviously, it does. A contradiction is something when you state two complete opposites. When you state that Muhammad has entered into the masjid, but Muhammad has not entered into the masjid. This is a contradiction. Ali has entered into the masjid, but Ali has not entered into the masjid. This is a contradiction. But when I state Muhammad has entered into the masjid, and then a moment later I state Ali has entered into the masjid, it doesn't necessarily contradict. We can reconcile this particular phrases by stating that Muhammad entered into the masjid and also Ali entered into the masjid. Thus, if I come forth and I state that those who were responsible for burying Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the 13th of Muharram were the people of the community, and I also state that those who were responsible for burying Imam al-Hussein are Imam al-Sajjad, alayhi salam, doesn't necessarily contradict. For when we come forth to go ahead and take a look at the historical circumstances of that particular day, of the burial of the blessed body of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam in his grave, we see that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, of course he was the one responsible for going into the grave. He was the one responsible for picking up that blessed body and taking it into the grave in Karbala. But this necessarily does not contradict the fact that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam could have called the people from those living in Karbala to say, help me with this, bring this to me, move this sand for me, aid me with this, pick this up, and so on and so forth. Thus we come forth and we state that those individuals who come forth and they bring forth this doubt and stating that Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is not authentic because it states that the people of that city, the city of Karbala, were responsible for burying Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we say absolutely does not contradict. Rather, we state that those people in the city of Karbala and the tribes surrounding the city of Karbala, they could have aided in some way or some fashion Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, but he was the one who of course carried out the most important of rituals and burying the blessed body of our master, Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Please recite one salawat. And the third doubt, and arguably the most well-founded doubt, in regards to Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa is in regards to this line that I'm about to recite toward you, O mu'mineen. This line is in regards to the actions of the women of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam immediately after the martyrdom of Abu Abdullah. In these lines, Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam, he explains the state of the women, of the family, of the household of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And many people, they come forth and they present this line as a doubt in regards to Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, saying that there is absolutely no way that the women of the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen would act in this way. They come and they recite and they present this line. Imam al-Zaman, he says in Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, barazna min al-khudur, nasharat al-shu'uri ala al-khudud, la timat al-wujuh al-safirat. It says that when that horse returned back toward the tent, that horse that didn't have a rider anymore, when the news had come of the martyrdom of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, that the women, they exited from their tents with their hair exposed as they were striking their faces. Many people, they come and they state that the women of Ahlul Bayt, they would act like this. They would run into the middle of the battlefield while men are watching them, and they would have their hair exposed, beating themselves. We respond by stating absolutely not. Rather, for those individuals who completely present a massive doubt in regards to this particular line of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, the ulama, they respond that if you do not want to accept this line, then that does not necessarily throw away the rest of the ziyarah. Rather, we can present this line as something that we don't understand. But another group of ulama have come to reconcile this problem in the most simplest of means. It is said that on the night of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam began to gather and began to establish his tents in such a way that his women would not be violated on the day of Ashura. And of course, we know exactly what happened to the tent of Zayd. It is said that the tent of the women of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the middle. Around that tent was the tent of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And around their tent was a larger tent which was consumed of all of the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. Thus, when we go back toward this line, the words of Imam al-Zaman, when it states barazna min al-khudud ناشرات الشعور على الخدود برزنا من الخدور ناشرات الشعور على الخدود لا تمات الوجوه الصافرات, that it says that when Imam al-Hussein comes back, when they hear about the news that Imam al-Hussein has been martyred and the horse returns back, that they exited from their tent. If they exited from their tent, where would they have entered into? Would they have entered into the middle of the battlefield? No, they would have entered into another tent. And there was no men in those tents because all of the men had been killed on the day of Ashura. When it came down to that moment when they were forced to leave the tent, would the women of Ahlul Bayt, they would come out with their hair exposed? No. They did it amongst themselves in the state of grief over the tragedy of what happens toward their master, Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. Thus we go ahead and we see that in regards to these doubts which are presented, in regards to Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, we can resolve them or reconcile them by these several means. Finally, in regards to the discussion of Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa, and I swear to you, my brothers and sisters, if you have the opportunity to read Ziyarat al-Nahiyat al-Muqaddasa in the midst of these days, tonight, tomorrow, the day after that, in these next 2.5 months, do your best to do so, and by God, I swear to you, your heart will be broken, because these are the words of your master, Sahib al-Zaman, in honor of Abu Abdullah. Oftentimes, we don't know what to say to Imam al-Hussein when we go and perform the ziyarah. When I was living in the holy city of Karbala, people would come to me and they would tell me, when I go for the ziyarah, I don't know what to say to him. I read the ziyarah, but I don't know what else to say to him. I want to talk to him. You go ahead and you see the words of Imam al-Zaman, alayhi salatu wasalam, they speak to our hearts because we have that same love, or we have a piece of that love that Imam Sahib al-Zaman has for his grandfather Abi Abdullah. We also have that emotion. We go ahead and we see that amongst those lines which really break the heart on this night, the night of Ashura. The words of Imam al-Mahdi toward his grandfather Aba Abdullah. I'll read you a couple of lines and then we'll move on to the Masa'ib. It is said that Imam al-Zaman, he says to Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, Salamun min qalbihi bimasa'ibika maqruh wa dam'uhu inda dhikrika al-masfuh. O Aba Abdullah, peace be upon you, salam be upon you from the heart which is wounded after your tragedy. And whenever your remembrance is made, my tears begin to flow with, my eyes begin to flow with tears. Then look at these lines of Imam al-Zaman. Look at the dedication that he has toward Aba Abdullah. Salamun lo, salamun min lo kana ma'aka bit-tufuf, lawaqaka binafsihi hadd as-suyuf. O Aba Abdullah, and peace be upon you from the one who wishes that he could have been with you. For if he was there with you, he would have been the shield for you, and he would have taken the swords into his chest. This is Imam Sahib al-Zaman. These are the words of our master. And then Imam al-Mahdi, he recites those most important lines of Ziyarat al-Nahiyah. He says, فَلَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِيَ الدُّهُورِ وَآقِنِيَ النَّصْرِ كَالْمَقْتُورِ ولم أكن لمن حاربك محاربا ولمن نسب لك العداوة مناسبا فلأندبنك صباحا ومساء ولا أبكين لك بدل الدموع الدما. He says, Oh Aba Abdullah, he says, and time and the divine decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hindered me from being there on that day of Ashura. But because I was unable to do so, I was unable to be present with you on that day of Ashura, then by God, take this as my gift and take this as my sacrifice, that I will weep and that I will cry for you day and night until my tears turn into drops of blood for you, O Aba Abdullah. My brothers and sisters, tonight is the night of Ashura. Tonight is the night of tragedy. Tonight is the night of dua. Tonight is the night of ibadah. Tonight, most importantly, is the night of Zainab. Zainab, salamullah alayha, on that day of Ashura, she was the one who had to deal with everything firstly, even before the day of Ashura. Zainab was there on that day when those individuals came toward the house of her mother Fatima, and they pushed that door which breaks the rib of Sayyid al-Zahra. Zainab alayha salam was there on that day in which Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam came back from the mosque of Kufa, and Zainab was there watching as her father's face turned yellow before he passed away on the 21st of the month of Ramadan. Zainab alayha salam was there on that day when Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was vomiting his own liver. And Zainab was there on that day of Ashura when Shimr was sitting on the chest of Aba Abdullah. But that wasn't it for Zainab. Zainab had to encounter the tragedies of the children. Zainab had to encounter the tragedy of Sukaina. Zainab alayhi salam had to be paraded from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Damascus. Zainab alayhi salam on a night like this, the night of Ashura, needs consoling for a number of reasons. And arguably the most important reason is, my brothers and sisters, today, though there are 15 million people, 10 million people next to the shrine of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein in Karbala, I ask you, brothers and sisters, how many people are there next to the shrine of Zainab alayhi salam? She is waiting for someone to go and visit her. She is surrounded by the sons of Shimr. Zainab alayhi salam is lonely, and on the night of Ashura, Zainab alayhi salam prepared for that loneliness. It is said that on the night of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he began by gathering together all of his companions, as we all know. He gathers together all of his companions and he tells them, Oh, my companions, that it is as if that I can see that tomorrow, the 10th of Muharram, is that day of martyrdom. But before we get there, let me just narrate toward you this. It is said that on the afternoon before, on the day of the 9th of Muharram, this day that just passed us, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, the battle was supposed to take place on that night. But it is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he tells his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas to go toward the camp of Umar ibn Sa'd, as we mentioned on a previous night, and go and ask them for permission for one extra night. Let me ask you a question, my brothers and sisters. If Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his family and his companions, they fought on Yawm al-Tasu'ah, this day, as opposed to tomorrow, the day of Ashura, wouldn't it have been a lot more strategic on behalf of Imam al-Hussein? They would have had a little bit more energy. It would have been in the evening as opposed to the daytime when the sun is bearing down on their back. It would have been one less day without suffering from the thirst, without water, and so on and so forth. Of course it would have been. Strategically, it would have been a lot better. But Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he goes and he tells Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, go toward Umar ibn Sa'd and ask him for one extra night, because لأني أحب الصلاة. For one reason, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how much I love to pray toward Him. And I want to spend this night in prayers. It is said that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas goes and he comes back to Imam al-Hussein saying that tomorrow after Salat al-Fajr, they will begin the battle. It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the night of Ashura, he gathers together all of his companions. He gathers together all of his companions and he tells them that it is as if that tomorrow I can see is the day of battle. It is the day in which each and every one of us will be martyred in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh my companions, oh my friends, that you don't need to be here. That I removed the bay'ah that you made toward me. I removed the allegiance that you made toward me. And I ask you to go back and take the hands of your family members and return back to wherever you came from. At this moment, Imam al-Hussein says, O family, O companions, the only one that I need with me, as we mentioned last night, is my son Ali al-Akbar. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam does not hear responses from anyone. Thus he goes toward the companions and he says, O companions of mine, Ya Ansar, go back toward your families. At that moment, Habib ibn Madahar, Muslim ibn Awsaja, Zuhair ibn Qayn, one by one they stand up. They recite epic lines of poetry to state, Oh Aba Abdullah, there's no way we're going to leave you. Not on this night. It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam looks toward the progeny, the family of Aqil. He says, Oh progeny of Aqil, you already lost Muslim. What a loss as Muslim. You've lost enough. Go back. You've sacrificed enough. They say, Oh Aba Abdullah, we have not sacrificed anything. And if you go and you read the Maqtal, you find that the entire lineage of Aqil, every one of them are martyred on the day of Ashura. Every one of them. He goes and he looks toward them one by one, and every one of them, they look firmly back into the eyes of Aba Abdullah, and they say, Oh Aba Abdullah, there is no way we're going to leave you, not on this night. At that moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he gathers together the companions and he begins to explain toward them exactly the strategy for the battle on the next day. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll speak about that. But very briefly, it is said that Imam al-Hussein on the night of Ashura, on the night of the 10th of Muharram, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam advised all of his companions to dig a ditch behind the back of the tents, so that no one could come with a sneak attack and enter into the tents of the women and the children. He ordered them to dig the ditch. They threw pieces of wood in there and they lit it on fire so that no one would come and no one would try to jump it. But I ask you, O Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, that you did this when you were alive, but on the night of the 11th of Muharram, that fire was the same fire burning the tents of Zayd. He began to prepare them for battle. He began to tell Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas that, Oh Abbas, you are the flag bearer tomorrow. He went toward Habib ibn Madahar and he says, Oh Habib, you are the leader of the companions and the commander of the right wing of the army. He went toward Zuhair ibn al-Qayn and said, Oh Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, you are the commander of the left wing of the army in tomorrow's battle. At that moment it is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam told them to go and spend that night in worship. They all went and they began to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They recited Quran, they sought forgiveness. The hadith and the narrators, they state that when we were listening toward the camp of Imam al-Hussein, we would hear the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We would see people in the state of qiyam, in the state of ruku', in the state of sujood. Of course, that famous story of the man Burair, a man who had gone through an immense amount of difficulties in his life. It is said that Burair al-Hamdani would always be smiling on that night of Ashura. They come toward him and they say, "Oh Burair, tonight is not a night of smiling." He says, "What do you mean? Tonight is the happiest night of my life, because it's the night when I can dedicate it, when I can prepare to dedicate it to my master Hussein alayhi salam." It is said that as the companions, as the family of Imam al-Hussein are all in the midst of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for one moment Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he steps out of the tent and he begins to walk toward the middle of the battlefield. Nafi' ibn Hilal al-Jamali, who we mentioned a couple of nights ago, he narrates that I was watching Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam every moment that night. All of a sudden, I realized in the midst of performing my worship, I turned toward the side and I no longer saw Hussein. So I quickly got up out of the tent and I began to look for him in the middle of the desert. He says, I was looking for him, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when all of a sudden I saw him standing on the middle of the battlefield, looking toward the tents of Umar ibn Sa'd. I crept up behind him. Imam al-Hussein turned toward me and he said, "Oh Nafi', what's wrong? Why are you approaching me like this?" Nafi' ibn Hilal says, "Oh Aba Abdullah, I'm fearful that one arrow might come toward you stray on this way and accidentally it might strike you. And I want to be your bodyguard. I want to protect you on this night." Oh Nafi' ibn Hilal, do you know how many arrows came toward Aba Abdullah on the day of Ashura? 4,000 arrows came toward the body of Aba Abdullah. Where were you to protect Hussein? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he looks toward Nafi' ibn Hilal and he says, "Oh Nafi', don't worry about me." Nafi' says, "Oh Abu Abdullah, what are you doing out here?" He says, "I'm looking and I'm preparing for the battle tomorrow." At this moment, one of the narrations, one of the historians, he writes that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam began to look in the sands of Karbala and began to pick up some rocks and throw it on the side. Nafi' ibn Hilal says, "Oh Abu Abdullah, why are you picking up these rocks and why are you throwing them to the side?" Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, "Because the women tomorrow are going to have to run on this sand and I'm afraid that their feet will get cut from this." It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam looks toward Nafi' ibn Hilal and he says, "Oh Nafi'." He says, "Do you see these two mountains between the plains of Karbala? Why don't you go slip in between them? Go back toward your family." Look at the words of Nafi'. The hadith, it says that at this moment Nafi' ibn Hilal, he fell toward the ground and he began to kiss the feet of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. And he says, "Thahalatni ummi, may my mother weep over me if I abandon you, O Aba Abdullah." The loyalty of the companions of Imam al-Hussein. It is said that at this moment Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam told them, "Ya barakallahu feekum, jazakumullah khairul jaza, Allah bless you." And at this moment, Imam al-Hussein went into the tent of Zainab. The narrations, the historians, they write that at this moment, Nafi' ibn Hilal was returning back to his tent, the tent of the companions, when he was overhearing the conversation of Zainab and Abu Abdullah. Can I tell you what this conversation was? It is said that at this moment, Zainab looks toward Abu Abdullah and says, "Oh Abu Abdullah, are you certain about your companions tomorrow? Are they all going to remain loyal to you? Are they really going to protect the children? Are they really going to protect the children and the daughters of Ali ibn Abi Talib?" It is said that at this moment, Nafi' ibn Hilal, after hearing the words of his master Zainab, he began to run toward the tent. He entered into the tent of Habib ibn Madahir. And he says, "Oh Habib, I have to tell you something. That Mawlatina Zainab is questioning our loyalty. Zainab is questioning our loyalty." It is said that at this moment, Habib ibn Madahir and the rest of the companions, they were sharpening their swords, waiting and preparing for the next day. Habib ibn Madahir, he stands up. He says, "Oh Ansar of Aba Abdullah, Zainab is questioning our loyalty. We cannot let Zainab down." It is said that at this moment he told them to all stand up. They all stood up. They ran from their tent. They ran in front of the tent of Zainab and they called out, "Oh our master Zainab, Ya Mawlatina Zainab, do not doubt that tomorrow we will be there to protect you until we die." It is said that at this moment a call was made from the women saying, "Oh Habib, oh companions of our master Aba Abdullah, Allah bless you and make sure that you never leave the covenant of protecting the women of Ali ibn Abi Talib." the companions, they returned back. They were preparing themselves for that battle tomorrow. And then it came to the most tragic part of that night. What is that most tragic part of that night, my brothers and sisters? It is the conversation between Zainab and Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he was trying to take some rest on that night of Ashura, but Zainab, she didn't sleep for one moment on this night. It is said that on that night of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he wakes up from a dream in the middle of his sleep. And he begins to recite some lines of poetry that are foretelling what is going to happen tomorrow. At this moment, Zainab bursts out into tears. She says, "Oh, Aba Abdullah, why are you reciting your masa'ib?" It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he looks towards Zainab and he says, "Oh Zainab, don't weep over me. Jaddi khayrun minni, wa abi khayrun minni, wa akhi khayrun minni." The Holy Prophet, our grandfather, he also passed away. That our mother Fatima, she also passed away. That our father Ali, he also passed away. That Imam al-Hasan, he also died. And at this moment, Zainab alayhi salam says, "I'm remembering them all foretelling us about that moment, about that day of tomorrow, when they state, La yawmaka yawmak ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Hussein, and by God, there is no day like the day of Aba Abdullah." My brothers and sisters, please forgive me as I'm going to narrate toward you the last moments of the life of Imam al-Hussein. And please bear with me on this night of tragedy, of the night of the 6-month-old infant. It is said that on the day of Ashura, or after the day of Ashura, Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, he captures Hurmala ibn Kahil. And he tells him, "Oh Hurmala, tell me what you did on that day of Ashura," before he kills him. It is said that at this moment, Hurmala ibn Kahil, he looks toward Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, and he says, "Oh Mukhtar, on the day of Ashura, I shot 7 arrows. 4 of them struck their target, and 3 of them missed." It is said that at this moment, Mukhtar al-Thaqafi says, "Oh Hurmala, tell me about the 4 targets. Tell me about the 4 arrows that struck its target." La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-ali al-azim. It is said that at this moment, Hurmala ibn Kahil, he says, "Oh Mukhtar, as for the first arrow that I struck on the day of Ashura, that hit its target, was the arrow that pierced the right eye of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. I saw Abbas, the brother of Hussein. He was riding on the horse. He didn't have any arms. At this moment, I saw the whiteness of his eye. I struck his eye. At that moment, a man came. He took an iron rod and he struck it on the head of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Usually when a man falls, he has his hands to protect him. But I saw Abbas fall face flat onto the ground, and the arrow pierced from his eye toward the back of his head." Barakallah feekum. Let out a scream. If you don't look at me, look down. Remember the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein. At this moment, it is said that Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, he says, "Oh Hurmala ibn Kahil, tell me what was the second arrow that hit its target on that day of Ashura." He says, "The second arrow that I struck that hit its target on the day of Ashura was toward the boy, the son of Imam al-Hasan, a boy named Abdullah." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was in his final moments. Abdullah ibn Hassan was holding the hand of Zainab. Abdullah looks towards Zainab and says, "Oh my aunt Zainab, are they really going to kill my uncle?" Abdullah runs toward Aba Abdullah. He looks toward Umar ibn Saad and he says, "Oh son of the wicked man, don't kill my uncle. I'm an orphan." At this moment, Umar ibn Saad looked toward me and he said, "Kill this boy." So I went and I took the arrow. I struck the chest of Abdullah ibn Hassan. He fell on the chest of his uncle Abu Abdullah. And he looked toward me and he says, "Oh my uncle, what have they just done to me?" I said, "Don't worry, you'll visit your father very soon."
Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, Adam Allah ujurakum, Ya Shi'a, Ya Sahib al-Zaman. At this moment, it is said that Mukhtar al-Thaqafi says, Oh Hurmala, tell me, what was the third arrow that you struck on that day? What was the third arrow that you struck on the day of Ashura? At this moment, Hurmala ibn Kahil says, Oh Mukhtar, that I've killed a lot of people, but that arrow, it pains me till today. He said, Oh Hurmala, what arrow was that? He said, that was the three-pronged arrow that I took to strike the neck of the 6-month-old infant. Brothers and sisters, it is the night of Ashura. Open up your hearts for your master, Abu Abdullah. He said, what happened? He said, on that day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he exits from his tent. He goes back in and he looks toward the tent of the companions and he finds no one remaining. He goes toward the tent of Banu Hashim. He finds no one remaining. He goes toward the middle of the plains of Karbala and he calls out his call. Hal min nasirin yansuruna, hal min yughithin yughithuna. Oh Abu Abdullah, take us instead. It is said that at this moment, Zainab, she's standing by the tent. In her hand, she's holding Abdullah Rabi. She's holding Ali al-Asghar. I ask you, O Mu'mineen, this question. I ask you, O Shia, this question. When a child is in pain, when a child is hurting, when a child is weeping, where do they go except toward their mother? But why does the narration state that Zainab, the aunt of the child, was holding her? Because Rabab didn't have any more energy on that day. She had seen everything and she could no longer bear to look at the face of her infant son. It is said that at this moment, Zainab says, Oh Aba Abdullah, oh Aba Abdullah, oh my brother, look at your son. He cannot even move anymore. He cannot even open his eyes anymore. Usually when a child is thirsty, when a child is hungry, they put out their tongue. But your son is not doing that anymore. Go and take him toward the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, and perhaps they will have a little bit of mercy for this child. It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes in toward the tent. He puts on the abba of Rasulullah. He tells towards Zainab and he says, Ya Zainab, nawilini waladi ar-radi. Give me the 6-month-old infant. It is said that at this moment, my brothers and sisters, listen to this. It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he takes Ali al-Asghar and he puts it under his abba, puts it under his cloak. But I ask you, why did he have to do that? He had to do that because the child was hot, because the child was thirsty, and on that day of Ashura it was very hot and they didn't have any water, so he had to cover the sun from bearing down on the head of the baby. It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he approaches the middle of the plains of Karbala. If you have been to Karbala, you know the maqam of Ali al-Asghar. He looks toward the camp of Umar ibn Sa'd. He says, O army of Umar ibn Sa'd, if you have a problem with me, then come and kill me. But what sin did this 6-month-old child of mine do to you? They look toward him. They look toward the child. Some from the army say, Oh Umar, give them some water. He's just a baby. The others said, no, kill them. Don't allow anyone from the family of Hussein to live. At this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, if you think that I'm going to take water, then take the child from my hand and you give him water yourself. At this moment it is said, Allahu Akbar. Umar ibn Sa'd, he looks toward Hurmala ibn Kahil. He says, Oh Hurmala, end this matter. At this moment it is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he picks up the child. He puts him in front of his chest. Hurmala ibn Kahil looks toward Umar ibn Sa'd. He says, "Oh Umar ibn Saad, how should I kill the child?" He says, "Look at that whiteness in his neck. Do you see that skin?" At this moment, Urmala ibn Kahil. At this moment, Urmala ibn Kahil, he takes a three-pronged arrow. An arrow you used to kill camels in the desert. Camels are responsibility to hold water. This child didn't have any water. He took the arrow. He pierced the neck of the Ayyan al-Asghar. He pierced the neck of the 6-month-old infant. The blood of the child went on the chest of Aba Abdullah. He looks up toward the sky. He says, "What should I do?" At this moment, a call was made, "Oh Hussein, be patient. There is someone to watch over him in paradise." Allahu Akbar, that's not it. That's not the tragedy, mu'mineen. That's not the tragedy. It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had to go back toward Rabab, had to go back towards Zainab. He walks in between, calling out, "Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, ridan biqada'ihi wa tasliman li amri." Oh Allah, whatever you want, keep on taking from me. Keep on taking whatever is going to make you satisfied. At this moment, it is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he takes the child, he puts it under his cloak, he begins to walk back toward the tent. It is said that at this moment, Sakina comes out of the tent and says, "Oh Father, did you get water for my brother? Is there anything left over for me? I'm thirsty, oh Father. I'm very thirsty today." At this moment, it is said that Zainab comes out from the tent and looks toward Aba Abdullah. As she says, "Oh Aba Abdullah, what happened to your son? What should I go and tell Rabab?" Imam al-Hussein says, "Oh Zainab, go and tell Rabab that Layla gave her son, that you gave your sons, that Farwaq gave her son, that Ramla gave her sons. Now it's our turn to give our son too." It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Allahu Akbar, Adam Allah ujurakum. At this moment, it is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes behind the tent and he begins to take his sword and he begins to dig a little tiny grave for the 6-month-old infant. At this moment, Zainab says, "Oh Aba Abdullah, why do you need to take this body and bury it while with all of the other companions you didn't bury it yet?" She says, "At this moment, I look towards Zainab. What's he gonna say to Zainab? What would happen on the night of the 11th of Muharram when they undig the grave of the 6-month-old?" The last moments in the life of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. It is said that at this moment, Mukhtar al-Thaqafi says, "Okay, this was the 3rd arrow that you struck on the day of Ashura. Tell me, O Hurmala, what was the 4th arrow that you struck on the day of Ashura?" Hurmala ibn Kahil says that on the day of Ashura, the final arrow that I struck was at the chest of your master, Aba Abdullah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he was on the horse. A man came, he took a rock, he threw it on the head of Aba Abdullah. At this moment, Imam al-Hussein, he lifted up his shirt to wipe the blood. I saw the whiteness of the chest of Hussein. That chest which Rasulullah used to kiss. That chest which Fatima used to kiss. I took the arrow. I took the arrow and I pierced the chest of Aba Abdullah. Wa Hussein! 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 Wa Hussein!
ये बानों की फुगा दुनिया में रह कर क्या करूं